Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and Leap, helping students to succeed on all kinds of tests from eighth grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning and TestBright, helping students and teachers alike exceed their educational goals based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 65 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is, are supplemental essays dead? But first, let's meet our special guest, Beth Kraemer.
Beth Kraemer is the co-founder of In College Consulting and has spent more than a decade helping families navigate the increasingly complex world of college admissions. With a background in journalism, education, and law, she brings both storytelling expertise and strategic thinking to her work with students. Beth earned a journalism degree from Northwestern University, a master's degree from The Ohio State University, and a JD from the UCLA School of Law. She first became involved in admissions as a Northwestern alumni interviewer. She is a professional member of the IECA and regularly visits campuses to stay current on admissions trends. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
Beth, we're really happy to have you on the show again. You appeared back in episode 715 for an IEC profile, which kind of tips off who you are and what you do. But for people who haven't listened to that, before we dive into the topic, please tell us who you are and what you do.
So, as Amy said, I am a consultant with a company called In College Consulting. We're based out of the Chicago area, but we have a team of consultants from across the country. We work with students across the country, and we primarily specialize in helping families navigate the admissions process, working with students as young as freshmen all the way up through seniors.
How did you get into college consulting? I can't remember the pathway for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Stumbled into it. I'm one of those people who really liked school and I was a journalism major, so I liked writing, I liked school, always kind of thought the admissions process, which of course looked very, very different when I went through it, but thought it seemed interesting. And I happened to be sitting at a baseball game, one of my son's games many years ago, with someone who was an essay coach. And I asked her, how'd you get into this? Which led me to conversations with the woman who became my mentor, who I worked for many years, and then eventually spun out and opened up my own shop, which is In College Consulting, right before COVID struck. So that was fun. An interesting time to start a business and to be working with students. But it actually all kind of worked out well because, as I said, now we're nationwide, and really COVID helped us see how the model could work remotely.
Interesting thing, you referenced COVID and the pandemic period, and that ushered such volatility into the college admissions process. There were lots of fixed stars as far as the process went. You had your grades, your test scores, which certainly have been under the microscope and back and forth, maybe more a pendulum swinging back and forth. But every other aspect of college admissions has come under scrutiny since the pandemic period began, and now we're in the post-pandemic period, and essays are definitely taking their moment under the lamp, as it were. Everyone's looking and scrutinizing the value of essays in the broad sense, but also specifically, and a recent wrinkle, another complication in admissions factors has been the role and value of supplemental essays. And this has been on your radar, Beth, right?
Yes, it's a huge, huge topic of discussion, both in our practice and among educational consultants across the country. Your episode asks, are supplemental essays dead? I wouldn't say they're quite dead, but they're possibly on life support. Kind of depends on who you ask and in what context, like everything else in college admissions. But to your point, Mike, it's interesting because it is sort of, I think this is potentially a pendulum swinging, just like with tests, right? After the pandemic, tests were on the chopping block. And a lot of colleges and universities said, oh, we don't need them. we can make decisions without them. That really prompted what I've been calling application inflation, which shows no sign of slowing. At the first couple of years after the world sort of returned to normal, we were like, okay, when are things going to get back to normal? There's no normal. There's just a new normal, which is sort of chaos and uncertainty.
So it's interesting because when you mention this idea of application inflation, right? We are sort of seeing that in the test prep world as far as, schools going back to requiring tests, which would mean reducing applications, right? But the flip side is if a school eliminates supplementals, wouldn't that be increasing applications?
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely seeing that just, working with students, which I do every single day. You see a lot of students that are like, oh, University of Georgia, I don't have to write a book essay. Great. I'm going to throw in an app. It happened at UVA last year. Their apps, I think, were up maybe like 27%, when they dropped. So even those students, they may not know anything about a school. They may have never visited, but they're like, oh, I heard it's good and it's easy enough to apply. I just check some clicks and pay the fee. So why not? But then it just perpetuates the problem.
And I still remember that with my oldest daughter. I think University of Michigan was not high on her list. And once she had completed all of her other apps, having to do something specific for them, she was like, forget about it. So I think, right, for some students, it's a reason to have to really think about, whether I want to apply or not. And what do I know about the school to be able to sometimes fill out those supplements? Because typically, what do supplemental essay topics look like as compared to your typical college application essay?
Right. So the supplements are really, I think, serve a very valuable function because they sort of fall into a couple of buckets. There are sort of the why essay, and it's either why us, why do you want to apply to our school? There's the why do you want to study the major that you listed? And then there are sort of more, eclectic topics, right? Like the book essay I mentioned, or UVM, they just got rid of, they had optional essays, and one of the choices was design your own Ben and Jerry's ice cream flavor. And that was always really fun. So it's like an opportunity to show creativity. And then there are some schools that have quick takes, like USC, where there's, what TV show will you binge watch next? Or something small that they're not even really essays, but they're just other data points, a way for students to show their personality and, show admissions officers another side to them beyond just the grades and the scores.
Do you think supplementals are harder to use AI for?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that was cited by one of the schools that dropped their essays was AI, but I think if you're going to use AI, you could use it just as easily to write a personal statement as you could a supplemental. And for any students or parents that are listening, if you're thinking of using AI to write your essays, you're shortchanging yourself.
Can you, Beth, give us some insight into some of the schools that have actually, in the last admission cycle, eliminated the requirement for supplemental essays and what their stated reasons were?
Yeah, so Tulane dropped their Why Tulane essay, which was a staple in admissions for years. And it's interesting because it used to be really, really long. They shortened it over, maybe the last 4 or 5 years, which was fine. And now it's just gone. And they actually stated, they cited the use of AI. They cited the prevalence of people like me, independent consultants helping students. Oh, and actually, interestingly, University of Georgia, David Graves posts a blog that's a really, really good admissions blog. And just yesterday, he posted, basically, he said they got rid of their supplemental essay because they found it wasn't very useful and they were trying to alleviate some of the stress. And he also sort of alluded to the idea of this application inflation and the fatigue on the part of his admissions team, having to read all these essays.
Ironically, Jeff Schiffman, when he was director of admissions for Tulane, was on our podcast about why that supplemental essay was not optional.
Are not optional, right?
It's so funny how much changed in a number of years.
I mean, in just a short time, I mean, that we all know this, right? Just how this shifting back and forth in a way that we probably didn't see in the 20 years prior in college admissions.
Right, right. I mean, we know when I got into this like a dozen years ago, there wasn't a lot of change from year to year.
Mm-mm.
And then it like to what you were saying, Mike, it really once the pandemic hit, instead of being a blip, it just became like a barometer for a new series of just upheaval in the admissions process.
So the schools that I know about, right? UGA,
Hmm.
Tulane, I believe University of Miami,
Yeah.
Mhm.
probably
Mhm.
UVA. What about schools? There are some schools that have actually leaned into the supplemental essay.
Yeah, yeah, to an extent. I actually was on a call earlier this week with Kirk Brennan at USC, and he said that they're adding an essay about having your viewpoints challenged. And University of Arizona added an optional essay last year, which of course, we all
Means
know
it's
optional
mandatory.
isn't really
Right, exactly.
optional. Um, and another thing that we haven't really talked about that I think is also a really interesting trend. To my knowledge, no school has said this, but if you look at some of the essays that are being dropped, Wash U dropped an essay. It was an optional essay that touched on the idea of identity and community. Cornell also dropped an essay. They're keeping some essays, both of those universities, but Cornell dropped an essay that was about identity and community. So it is kind of interesting. There's speculation that some of that has to do with changing political climate and, kind of a concern on the part of universities about potentially eliciting information that could run afoul of the Students for Fair Admission case. But again, that I've not heard anything official on that. That's just speculation. And having seen a few schools, Miami's essay was also focused on identity and community. So, maybe there's some legs to that theory, but I don't know for a fact that that's what was motivating it.
So what we're talking about is the fact that this one aspect of the admissions process is a lot more confusing and specific to schools than it was in the past. If you had asked an expert just a couple of years ago, should I do my supplementals? You'd be like, if it's elective school, you should do everything that you can.
Mm-hmm.
How are families supposed to figure out whether they should be doing their supplemental essays or not?
Right. I mean, there's no one size fits all. That's why we always joke, but it's not really funny that the answer to every admissions question is it depends,
Yeah, right.
but typically we advise families and students if you have, if there's something optional and you have something additive to say, you should take advantage. If it's a, question about, an optional essay about a severe hardship or something, or to, a lot of schools will offer an opportunity to explain, any aberrational grades or anything like that. If you've got a transcript full of A's, you don't need to answer that. But if
Mhm.
there's an opportunity to share something about your background, your perspective, your way of thinking that the school doesn't already know elsewhere, then you should take advantage of that opportunity because that's one of the reasons why I think it's unfortunate that schools are getting rid of these essays, not because it's fun to have kids be overwhelmed and, you know, struggling to think of answers, but I do think it's really a useful exercise for students, to either reflect on themselves, to reflect on why did I pick this major, to reflect on why am I even applying to this school. So there's that aspect of it. And I think another piece of it really kind of comes down to, that opportunity to stand out, especially with, so much homogeny in the applicant pools, that there's ways for students to really show like what makes them unique. And without, the essay takes away one more opportunity to do so.
Well, especially because even on the Common App essay, I mean, you only have so many words. So when you're allotted more words somewhere else, to me, it is an opportunity to be able to put something in there that might not have been able to be visible on the other elements of the Common App, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think, it's really interesting because I mean, ultimately I understand it, from an admissions office lens, they're looking to see what information they can actually use. But going back to testing, right? 5 years ago, we don't need tests. And then all of a sudden, oh, maybe we do need tests. And so I've always been of the opinion more information is better, right? Like you can choose to look at the information, you can read an essay and be like, oh, that wasn't helpful, and move on and look at the other components. But for some students, it might be helpful, just like for some students, scores might be helpful. And
But
other
that's the
students,
admissions inflation anyway, right? It's like grades and scores, that's one thing. The Common App essay, that's one thing, right? All the extracurriculars. We certainly counsel students against extracurricular bloat, right? Don't do
mhm.
every activity under the sun thinking that more is better. Is there a point that some of these schools are trying to make? They're saying we're not looking at your supplemental essays. It's not helping us, so you can do it, but we're probably not going to look at it.
Right, right. No, I mean, and that's a very fair point, right? If they're really not looking at it, then, it's a pointless exercise to make everybody go through it. Although, like I said, I think there's value in really sitting, I wonder how many admissions officers sit down with a 17-year-old and say, why do you want to go to this school? And they go, I love the football team. The campus is pretty. Okay, why do you want to go to
Yeah,
this
right.
school
That's
besides
when
those
that's what they're
reasons?
looking for. They're looking for the reasons to be like, nah, you probably don't have good reasons. So I guess I'm trying to get at, even though we're talking about the changing role of the supplemental essays, if the application still includes supplemental essays, students shouldn't be thinking, well, since some schools aren't looking at them, this school won't look at them
Right.
either. If they're there, like if a school got rid of supplemental essays, they're not in the application.
Correct. Right. Yes.
We still want to consider if it's in the application, it's important.
And I think if there's an optional essay, illicit absolutely does not apply to you to the point where it would be silly for you to manufacture a response, then you should answer it, because I would say more than ever, any schools that are keeping their essays or even changing them, that was a conscious choice. And so it shows that the school is really trying to elicit some sort of information and using that supplemental essay as a tool to do so.
I'm curious, the why school X, why do you want to come here? For a school that has that supplemental, might it be helpful to understand how important demonstrated interest it is in that school? Because I would imagine if I know a particular school really does look at demonstrated interest and they have a supplemental of why college X, to me, that would be a place where it's really critical to make sure, you're answering that question, because they're going to connect that and that might influence their yield, right? If you don't give a great answer, then you might, I'm just curious. I wonder what the data at schools might show about that, because if you have a really good Y school X, are you more likely to attend there if you're accepted, right?
Right. I think so. I think that, right, it's easy to open emails and click the links and whatever. But, the way we think of demonstrating interest is really demonstrating understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
the way you're really able to do so is, can you clearly articulate in that why essay why you want to go to that particular school, what opportunities and resources you'll take advantage of. And the other part I think a lot of students miss is what you're going to contribute while you're there. It's not just what you can do for the school, or sorry, what the school can do for you. It's what you can do for the school. And so I think that, and it's funny because, we're not, I feel like we're picking on Tulane. I'm really not. I love Tulane. But if you go on their website, they still have language about the why essay and how it's such an important way, to show exactly to your point, Amy, about the school and the fit. And so I think that's why I feel like it's, I understand, and I don't have the lens of admissions officer, and I know that they are processing just a tremendous volume of applications. And so if they're not finding it useful, then, they shouldn't make students do it. But I do think there is an unfortunate byproduct of removing that, in terms of eliminating that opportunity to show that understanding, also that reflective exercise for the student themselves. And I think it also, incidentally perpetuates the application inflation problem, because, then, like you said, we already have students. Tulane's app is free, right? What do you think is going to happen to their application numbers this year?
And that kind of leads me to my final question for you, but I will point out, it's fair to bring up Tulane because they put themselves in the conversation.
They did.
And this is a lot about positioning, and the schools that are publicly eliminating their supplemental essays and making statements, they are positioning. The schools that are asking for more are positioning. So there's that level of jockeying for attention to increase applications, to increase your selectivity. We can't ignore that. I wonder if you have any predictions about what the next couple of years of admission cycles will hold for supplemental essays and for the general essay.
Oh boy. So I wish I had my crystal ball on me,
That's
but
why I only asked for a couple of years. You don't have to do a decade.
I have a hunch that this trend is going to continue. I think, it seems to be maybe a tad regional, kind of like how the testing policies went. They were either regional or, and I hate to use like tier of colleges, but that's kind of how people think of them. So I do think that, especially either larger public universities that just have just staggering volumes of applications, and or maybe the slightly less but still very selective schools, will probably be more likely to kind of follow this trend and drop supplementals. I think, the really selective schools, obviously the ones that admit by major, I think that we're going to see those supplementals stay in place, because, that's a key piece to how they really assess fit for major. So that's, I guess, where I see this going. But I also think longer term, the pendulum might swing again, unless we blow the whole thing up and redo how we, reboot the admissions process, which is a whole other episode.
Uh-huh.
But, I feel like we're sort of due for a major overhaul in some way, because, this inflation problem is just not sustainable long term.
Correct.
Does that reboot, reset, need for reconsideration have anything to do with artificial intelligence?
I think, yeah. I mean, the whole doesn't everything in society basically, have to do with that? I think, I mean, that's another, like I said, that's another episode, but that's a big concern we're seeing right now, among families as they're looking at majors in schools. And, I always tell a story of, I had a student who was interested in computer science, went into college, could basically, went to a very prestigious university, and everybody thought, that student could write their own ticket, graduated and was making coffee, like how quickly that changed. And so I think that you have to, I think AI is definitely going to play a role. That's a big question too, is how are admissions offices using it? Like, are robots writing these essays? Are robots reading these essays? Are we even relevant anymore? Those are the things that keep me up at night, but and make me feel very glad that I'm at the point, where have more years behind me than ahead of me. but there's definitely going to be some sort of reckoning within
Reckoning,
admissions.
yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to have to wait patiently
Stay tuned.
to see how this all unfolds. This has been a fantastic conversation, Beth. I know we could talk about it all day. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Always fun to talk to you guys.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So super easy. The name of our business is In College Consulting, as in we help people get in. So it's incollegeconsulting.com, and they can submit their information right through the website, and then somebody will get in touch.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tess and the Rest.